We have more details about the All Elite Wrestling Turner Sports TV deal next on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. Hello and welcome to the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. This is Ralph Valenti. Make sure you subscribe and hit that bell for notifications as we're trying to hit 5,000 YouTube subscribers before All Elite Wrestling, Double or Nothing. So over the weekend, we got an exclusive report from WrestleTalk saying that the deal with AEW and Turner Sports all depends on what network it's going to be based on the roster size. So they have some great names right now. They have Jericho, they have Omega, they have the Bucks, Cody, we know that. They have Neville. Yep. And as the weeks progress towards Double or Nothing, the roster keeps growing and more names get announced, including this past weekend where we got Brian Pillman Jr., a former guest of the Squared Circle Psychobabble, and Darby Allin, who is one of the most popular independent wrestlers in the independent wrestling scene. So they're definitely getting some recognizable names in the wrestling industry. But does that equate to recognizable names in the mainstream?
Right.
And it depends. If this is a big enough roster, it will go on TBS. If not, it could go to TNT. Both are great spots for All Elite Wrestling, but you would think TBS would be the better decision of these two for AEW's sake.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, as long as they can secure some type of TV deal where they're getting some type of exposure, it's going to be good for All Elite Wrestling. So you talked a little bit about their roster and their ability to kind of draw a crowd or at least attract attention, because ultimately that's what's going to be the most important thing at the end of the day. The only way this company is going to make money outside of, t-shirt sales and ticket sales and things of that nature is advertising. A good majority of the money, especially when you compare them to WWE, is probably going to come from advertising. So what that means is they're going to have to be attractive, meaning people are going to want, or they have to want to put their ads on their television show. So when you look at the roster, like you said, you look at a guy like Chris Jericho, really big name inside the wrestling industry, but also a really big name right now outside of the wrestling industry. For anybody who knows anything about Chris Jericho, we know he is in the band. He's the front man of the band Fozzy. Now, Fozzy, for a good majority of years, I think a lot of people didn't necessarily take them seriously, but their most recent song, Judas, really kind of took them to the next level. They do a lot of touring. They just got signed to a bigger promotion with Sony. So that's something that you have to take into consideration. A guy like Chris Jericho having the prowess that he has within the wrestling community, but also outside of that, he's a big name. And I said when this first happened, when they first signed him, that the signing of Chris Jericho was going to be more impactful than people actually realized, specifically for something like this, where they go to the table, they start negotiating, what TV channel are we going to be on? Who do you have on your roster? You say a name like Chris Jericho, he's done everything there is to do within the wrestling industry, and then he's done stuff outside of that. So he's able to make himself relevant, which is a good thing for them.
Yeah, it definitely is. But you look at the rest of the AEW roster, and don't get me wrong, these are some of the best wrestlers in the world with Kenny Omega and the Bucks and Cody. But outside of Chris Jericho, who is that mainstream guy that people could recognize?
Yep.
Sure, every wrestling fan can recognize Kenny Omega and every wrestling fan can recognize the Young Bucks. Does that equate to the mainstream crossover? I think in time it will be.
Yeah.
And here's where it's going to matter the most on what network it's going to be. TBS, to me, is the better choice for AEW because if in fact it is going on Tuesday nights, which it seems like that's the case, there's nothing on Tuesday nights for TBS.
Right.
Year round. TNT, on the other hand, that's when they broadcast basketball games. So if you guys remember when Monday Night Raw first started back in the early 90s, they always had problems with the U.S. Open and the Westminster Dog Show and stuff like that.
I was just going to say that damn dog show that you go to watch Monday Night Raw and there's the dog show on.
Right. So then what they have to do is either pre-tape it or they do a show on Saturday night or they move it to third. They had some really weird things that they would do to that schedule, and that would kind of defunct the continuity of keeping a consistent fan base.
Right.
Whereas now, if you have that where basketball season's happening, you know, basketball is a huge moneymaker for TNT, and they're not going to move Tuesday night basketball for All Elite Wrestling, especially when it's an upstart promotion and it might not necessarily get the viewership at first. So they definitely need to make sure that their roster is good enough to have it go on TBS. That's my personal opinion. I think at the end of the day, Turner Sports is going to look at that and say, all right, we will put this on TBS because of the fact that there's nothing going on Tuesdays.
Yeah.
So now moving on to that, you have to ask yourself, is this roster, in fact, strong enough for that?
Yeah, I definitely think it is. Like I said, you know, Chris Jericho is obviously a big name. The other big name signing, not even somebody who's going to be competing inside the ring, is Jim Ross. So again, when you talk about the who's who of the wrestling industry, you look at a guy like Jim Ross, certainly a great mind for the business, the best commentator, in my opinion, of all time. I think most people would agree with that. We recently learned that he is going to be doing some type of commentary for them. He said that his contract is roughly 3 years, and he's confident he'll be able to commentate for the entirety of that contract. So there's that. There's Jim Ross. Of course, you have Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, who I don't know if they're necessarily at fever pitch like they were maybe 3 months ago, but that's only because they really haven't done much, especially Kenny Omega. But you know, whenever AEW teases a big announcement, we know that people really get into it. You know, when you look at some of the trends, like the t-shirt sales, obviously ProWrestlingTees.com, all their top merchandise, aside from Marty Scurll, are pretty much all AEW guys, you know, the Bucks, Omega. So,
and don't forget that they basically are keeping Hot Topic afloat.
Yeah, absolutely.
With their t-shirts, and when they had their Bullet Club stuff in Hot Topic, I mean, they're still selling stuff in Hot Topic. So,
and the other thing too that I talk about as well is, and I think this is relevant, is when you look at what Chris Jericho and Kenny Omega did when they had their match. So New Japan Pro Wrestling had, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, they had X amount of people that were subscribed. Once that match was announced between Chris Jericho and Kenny Omega, the subscriptions increased. Forget what he said. He said it on his podcast. Let's just say it was 60,000 people. I don't know. It was a significant increase in subscriptions just to see that match. So again, that just goes to show you the draw power of not only Chris Jericho, but Kenny Omega. So at the end of the day, I think their roster is big enough. The other thing that is going to help them too is as they become more and more prominent within the industry and become more well-known, they'll be able to attract some of the talent, maybe some of the guys from WWE that aren't necessarily as promoted as the top guys there.
The quote-unquote frustrated WWE guys, you know, and we're going to have a future episode talking about that more in detail. But the other side of the coin, as I brought this up too, is the streaming, you know, and they didn't really go into too much detail about the streaming on this report with WrestleTalk, but I think, again, this is going to be a huge part of this. If it does go on Bleacher Report Live, how big is that for Bleacher Report Live that All Elite Wrestling is going to be on there? Because you have to think, I think more people have access to Bleacher Report Live worldwide than they would Turner. Because, yes, Turner is very accessible here in the States, but you have wrestling fans in the UK, Australia, Japan, you know, all over the world. And, you know, for those that watch our episodes here on YouTube, thank you, all over the world. And we see the trends. It's not just the United States. We see that there's viewership all over the world. Bleacher Report Live, that could be a big thing. And that might be just a small thing that most people aren't talking about, but end up being the great deal at the end.
Yeah.
So what do you guys think about this? All Elite Wrestling, is their roster strong enough? You can vote on the eye above my head. You can comment below. Don't forget to share this all over social media and like this video. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SCPB Podcast. Subscribe, hit that bell for notifications as we're trying to hit 5,000 YouTube subscribers before All Elite Wrestling, Double or Nothing. For Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti, and thank you for watching the Squared Circle Psychobabble.